Hi everyone, and welcome to Module 3, Video 2. So in this module, and this video, we're going to talk about offerings, okay? So this is what can we do to give things to the gods and the spirits. So firstly, what are offerings? So offerings are gifts that can be given to the gods and to the spirits, okay? They can be many things, they can be tangible, they can be intangible. So tangible means that they're physical offerings. Intangible means that they're non-physical offerings. So they could be things like poetry, praise, dance, song, things like that. And it's important to remember that you want to be giving your best. Okay, this isn't something that you just give some rubbish that you don't really want anyway, or anything like that. It's you're giving something as a gift to someone, like you would give a gift to a friend or family member. You want it to be something that's nice for them. Okay, so give your best. Okay. Now, why would we give offerings? Okay, is there any evidence that we give offerings in texts? Well, let's look at for Joel's 5th Mal 55 to 56, which says, "Aid bring they to all who offering give, if need be found therefore. Soon aid they all who offerings give on the holy altars high. And if danger they see for the sons of men, then each from ill do they guard." So there's a few things to look at here. So firstly, is another example of holy altars. Okay, so another example of why an altar is a good thing to have in heathenry. But then it says that they give aid to anyone who gives them offerings. Okay, and they protect those people from danger. So if you want help and you want protection from the gods and spirits, then you need to give offerings. Okay, and this is a text that obviously shows that that's really important. So let's talk about some of the theoretical side of things behind offerings. Why is it we're giving these offerings? What are the texts saying? So the first thing is that the material realm itself is seen as sacred. It's something that is seen as created by the gods, okay? It's not like Christianity where it's a fallen, horrible, impure thing, okay? Material goods are sacred things. They're good things, particularly if they're from nature, or if you've put your own effort and physical strength or thought or creativity into something, okay, and made something for them. So the material realm is not something that's bad that we want to keep the gods away from. It's something that they enjoy and they see as sacred just as much as we do. Giving an offering is more meaningful than just words. Now, I know in Western culture and from Christianity, we are very much like, well, prayer is just praying to someone saying a few words and that's it. But no, the heathens knew in the past, as did all pagan cultures, that words are okay and they're important, but we want to make them more meaningful, and we give them, therefore, offerings. Okay. Now, we've talked before about reciprocal relationships, about gift giving, about sacrifice, about ghosty and hospitality. So gift exchange forms a bond, okay? When you give someone a gift, that is helping to build a relationship with them. And when they give you a gift, that again, it builds a relationship. And it's like a cycle of giving, okay? So when we're giving offerings, one of the main things we're trying to do is build this reciprocal relationship with the gods and the spirits, okay? It's less about sort of bribing them, saying, I'll give you this and then you can give me that. It's less about that. It's about much more about a reciprocal relationship. It's about building that relationship with them. Okay. And it's a way, when we give offerings, a way of communicating with and connecting with the gods and spirits. Okay. It's an important example of how to do that. Now, when we give an offering, often it's food or drink. Okay. And if we look in the past, they would often have a sharing of a sacred meal. Okay. Jakob al-Tartushi, he visits Denmark in the Viking times, and he mentions that they sacrifice animals, but then they share that meat with the community. So an offering and a sacrifice, it isn't necessarily always just for the gods and spirits. The community gets something out of it as well, particularly if there's a sacrifice for an animal or some sort of food. And you can do the same. You could give food to the gods, and you have some and they have some, and you're sharing a meal. You're sharing a meal maybe with other people, but also you're sharing a meal with the gods and the spirits as well. It's a sacred meal, okay? And sharing is a sacred thing. It shows hospitality. When you are a guest and a host, often the host will provide the guests that come to their home with food and drink and warmth and things, and the guest might bring, say, a bottle of wine or something as well, and you're exchanging gifts, okay? That's showing hospitality, okay? It's also about practicing generosity. Generosity is an important heathen value, and when we give something, we are being generous. We're being generous with our gifts, with our money, with our time, with whatever, okay? So generosity, again, it's part of heathen practice. You may also want to give thanks for gifts that the gods have already given you, okay? So you might want to show some gratitude and say thank you, but also you're saying thank you by giving those gifts to them. Like when we talked about Ibn Fadlan's stuff, where his account, they went and they gave a small offering, and then they promised to give a bigger offering in thanksgiving once that what they'd asked for had been granted. So it's a thanksgiving, the second gift, for what they've given. Okay, it's I give because you give. Now, heathen kings, okay, they had to give their warriors gifts in order to get loyalty or as reward and payment. Otherwise, the warriors would not have been interested in working for them. Okay, and it's the same sort of relationship here, is that we give gifts and then they give gifts to us. It's as loyalty, as reward, as payment. It's not the same relationship with the gods. We're not trying to reward them or pay them for things, but this is where the understanding probably of the gift giving is coming in. Okay, they're used to a culture where the kings had to give gifts, okay, and then they got a gift in return of loyalty from the warriors who would fight for them. Now, there's an idea that possibly the gods and the spirits will feast off the energy in the gifts. Okay. Now, if you look at, say, animist cultures, there's often talk about feeding the spirits. Okay. So when we give an offering, we're essentially feeding the spirits. Okay, and that's probably also how it was seen in heathen times as well. There's some cultures, particularly say look at the Chinese culture, they have this concept of a hungry ghost, but really this appears in lots of different cultures, which are the dead or the spirits who haven't received what they should have, and so they're hungry. They come back and haunt the world to try and get food and energy and stuff. So maybe when we're giving offerings, we're also helping to feed the gods and spirits, almost like an energetic exchange of life force. So the food, particularly when it's fresh, if it's like fresh fruit and stuff like that, flowers and all that sort of stuff, it's got a life force, and the gods and the spirits can feed off that life force to help empower them. Importantly, it's also about the reenactment of the Indo-European myth of creation. We talked about how the myth was that there was a sacrifice made. The man kills his twin in a sacrifice and then makes the world out of him, out of his body. So when we're giving an offering, we're essentially recreating that very first creation, okay, which makes it a sacred and holy thing. As I said, Ibn Fadlin, you give a small offering when making the request and then return with a bigger one once it's granted. Now, in Viga Glum's saga, it says, Frere, or this person's praying to Frere, basically. He says, Frere, you have long been my patron and accepted many gifts and repaid them well. So when we do give a gift, the gods do give things back to us, okay? A gift for a gift, okay? It's not bribery and giving just to get something back. It's about relationship. But we should expect that if we're going to give a gift, that they are going to give us gifts back as well, okay? It's got to be a two-way thing. So, yeah, so it can be seen as a bribe and payment, but it's not. It's much more. It's a way of building the relationship and showing gratitude as well for the things in our lives, the good things in our lives. Okay. So these are sort of the theoretical basis for why we might want to give offerings. Then we got the Habermal. So what does the Habermal say? Well, verse 41 says, "Friends shall gladden each other with arms and garments, as each for himself can see. Gift givers' friendships are longest found, if fair their fates may be. To his friend, a man, a friend shall prove, and gifts with gifts requite." Verse 44, "If a friend thou hast, with whom thou fully wilt trust, and good from him wouldst get, thy thoughts with his mingle, and gifts shalt thou make, and fair to find him oft." So what all this is saying is friendships basically are longest and best when you give gifts to each other. Okay, it helps to build that friendship. Okay, because you're giving them gifts and they're giving you gifts, and you build a friendship. Now this last verse here for 44, it says thoughts with his mingle, so that's basically chatting and spending time and discussing things. Give gifts, so gifts shalt thou make, and fair to find him oft, so go and find him and spend time with him, basically. And we can take these ideas into our practice of giving offerings. So we're trying to build a friendship, a relationship with the gods. We give gifts, they give gifts back to us. Okay, it's about building that relationship. Okay, so that's the theory. Let's get into the practical things. What actually happened historically in terms of offerings? What types of offerings did they give? So there are basically four types of offerings that we can see often in the text. There's libations, there is food, there are objects, and there is blot. Okay, so bloat. So libations are basically pouring liquid. Okay, you pour liquid out into a bowl or on the ground or something like that. So it says in the text, for instance, that Odin lives purely on wine. So if you want to have a relationship with Odin, often the best offering to give him is wine. Okay, and mead is a version of wine. It's a honey wine, but other types of wine is fine as well. So Odin lives off wine. So you want to pour a libation in, and that's why we have that offering bowl on our altar. You can pour wine or water or whatever it's going to be into there. Then you could do something like milk. Now, milk is often seen as a good thing to give to the elves and the lesser spirits, basically. But you could also give it to the gods as well. And that's across lots of cultures. Okay, milk, it seems. And one of the theories behind this, there's no guarantee on this, but the theory behind this is that milk contains a lot of fatty stuff, carbs. It's the same with bread and other bits and pieces like that. And so does that strengthen them in some way? Can they absorb that fat and carbs, or the essence of those things, to help them? Okay. Then you've got mead. Obviously, mead is a very traditional offering. We know it was used in drinks in ancient times. In fact, it's probably the oldest alcoholic beverage that we know of in history. And it's always been seen as a sacred drink across all Indo-European cultures. Everything from India to Rome to Greece to Celts and heathens. Okay, and there's a lot of mythology and history around mead, which we'll go into in a later module. Ale is again another one, particularly at the harvest. So when you've got these things have just been made, the first ale can be given to the gods and spirits. So libations, basically liquid. There's a story of Saint Columbanus in the 600s who came across a heathen group, and they were giving a big vessel of ale to Odin. Okay, so again, we've got example of libations here. In fact, mead, it was so heathen that churches had to ban its use. For instance, the Council of Auxerre said, "It is not permitted to offer the honey drink called mead on the altar in the divine sacrifice, nor any other drink except for wine mixed with water." So they have to rule out mead as an offering in the Holy Communion, basically, because it's seen as an offering to the gods and spirits, which obviously the church don't like. So next we come to food. Now, we've already talked about food being a sacred meal where you're communing with the gods. And often what happens is for instance, in an animal sacrifice, the meat of the sacrifice is eaten by the people, and the blood of the sacrifice is given to the gods. Okay, and it might be poured out as a libation, it might be sprinkled on things. Like in Heimskringla, there's a ritual where they kill the animal and gather the blood, and the blood they sprinkle on the altar, on the temple, on the people, but particularly on the gods' statues as well. Okay, as a sort of offering to them. And then the meat is boiled up and eaten by the people themselves. There's various saga accounts where they're feasting with elves. For instance, in Halsbok, and there's the example of a woman, or a bishop basically gets annoyed because this woman is going out and eating with the elves, or eating at the place of the elves, leaving a bit of a sacrifice for them. There's also plenty of laws which banned the eating of food at ritual sites like trees and graves across the Norse and the Anglo-Saxon world. So we can see that food was given as an offering to the gods. It may have been eaten and then the blood given, or it may be that the actual food itself was also given to the gods. Objects. Now we find many deposits of objects in rivers, in bogs, in lakes, and other different water sources. Okay, so Orosius, he mentions that they threw war booty into rivers. Archaeology, they're often finding treasure being buried in places. Now, that could be that people just wanted to bury their treasure and they come back for it. But also it's likely that in some of these places, especially when they are places that are associated with the gods and spirits, like sacred sites, it's quite likely that they were offerings that were being buried. You've got objects that are placed in the foundations of buildings. So when they first build a building, they might put some sort of sacred object. Sometimes it is a sacrifice of an animal or a human. But it could be other objects as well, put in the foundations of the buildings as a type of offering to appease the spirit of the place. So they're protected, the building. And we've got the examples of like the bog bodies in Denmark, which may be sacrifices. Often when lakes are dried up, you'll find a lot of sacrifices, or bogs as well. And they tend to be things like jewelry and weapons and coins and things that, well, the stuff we find anyway is stuff that lasts. And they might be broken. Often it's because you're giving it to the other world, you don't want it to be usable back in this world again. So they might bend their weapons or smash up their jewelry or something like that as offering. And then also when you think about the dead and the grave mounds, they often put in things to help the dead in their future life, and that could be seen as an offering to the dead, maybe. Then you've got blot. Now, blot was usually a blood sacrifice, although blot actually can mean any type of sacrifice. Like I said, animals were sacrificed and their blood was sprinkled on the god statues, altars, participants, and then the meat is eaten. Now, there's different ideas of why this was done and what's the offering part here, because an animal obviously isn't necessarily, you're not giving up your life, so what are you actually giving up? You're giving up the animal. Yes, but really what you're giving up is the future potential of the animal and its descendants for your farm, because they were mostly farmers even those who went to battle, most of the time they were often farmers in their everyday lives. So what you're doing when you make some sort of sacrifice like this is giving up the future potential of that animal. And so it's not that the gods want blood, it's that they want the gift, okay? And this way you're giving something up, you're actually making a proper sacrifice of something that could benefit you. Now, let's talk about human sacrifice. So in the past, there are examples where we think that there was possibly human sacrifice. However, it could also have just been propaganda, because the people who talk about these things tend to be ones who are often antagonistic towards the culture, and they want Christians, and they want to present it in a bad light. So you've got Adam of Bremen, who talks about the sacrifices happening at the temple in Uppsala, where they're like hanging 99 humans on the tree and things like that. You've got Tacitus, who's a Roman, who talks about them sacrificing prisoners of war. And then you've got some historical or archaeological evidence that possibly is human sacrifice. They found these bodies that have been put into bogs in Denmark, and they were restrained and killed in sort of weird ways, like the triple types of killing and stuff like that. So they may be human sacrifices, they may not. Okay. So was there human sacrifice? Possibly. But either way, nowadays it's not acceptable. So human sacrifice is not something for you to do, obviously. Now, there's a couple of other examples of things. So Ibn Fadlin says that offerings were given by merchants to get new customers. Okay. Tacitus says they were given in thanks for victory in war. Vigaglum Saga says Frey accepted Thorkel's offerings for revenge or for justice and repaid them well. Okay, so there's different reasons to give these offerings. One is whether it's in business to get customers. It might be for victory when you're facing conflict or war, when you've been treated unjustly. So there's a whole range, basically, of different ways in which, or different reasons for which offerings were given in the past, and just as there will be today when we give offerings as well. Okay, so let's talk about modern offerings. So there are many, many options for what you can give as an offering, and we'll go through some of them here, okay? So firstly, the important thing to think about is, well, what were the God or the Spirit like? Okay, maybe you want to look at what were they given or what are they associated with in the lore, okay? When you read the lore, make a note when you read about the gods or the spirits, what they tend to like. Folklore as well, folklore stories can also give you examples. Also, what would they dislike? There may be some things that actually they just don't want those things. And a good way of doing this is do some divination and ask them. Say, would you like this? Do your rune divination or whatever method you're going to use. See what comes back. When you're giving to the ancestors, you may want to think about what were their favorite foods or drinks that they had in life and give those sorts of things to the ancestors. Water, that's always an acceptable offering, but don't let it be all that you do. Don't let it be a lazy offering, okay? If that's all you can afford and that's all that's available, that's perfectly fine. But if you're just doing it because you can't be bothered to go out and buy some beer or some apples or something like that, well, then it's not a sacrifice, really. It's not an offering, and then it's not so acceptable. And water, what you could do to make it really special is you can get it from 3 different sources. So you could get something like rainwater, collect that when it's raining, water from a spring or a well, or maybe water gathered at a special time, like when it's thundering, you can collect some water, and that's thunder water. And then you could potentially add all that to tap water. So if you've only got small amounts of it, you could mix them together and then put it into tap water, or put some of it into a tap water and give it as a special offering that way. Mead. Mead, as I said, is a really good offering for spirits, but be careful about what you're doing outside, because alcohol is bad for the ground if there's lots of plants there. Okay, so careful. Don't pour it on the ground, basically, especially unless, like, if it's a rock or something, you're probably fine, but don't pour it directly onto plants and trees and things like that. If you've got your rock altar, it's probably okay on that. Also, be careful to check it's genuine mead and that it tastes okay first. If the mead doesn't taste very nice, don't give it. If you wouldn't drink it, then don't give it to them. Okay, if it's not good enough for you, it's not good enough for them. And also check it's genuine mead, because there's a lot of things out there that say that they're mead, and actually they're just normal wine that they've added a little bit of honey into. They haven't actually fermented the honey and turned it into proper mead. So if it's really cheap, it's probably not mead. Okay, milk and honey. So again, these are really good ones for outdoors. Honey, though, be careful, it will attract like ants and other bits, creatures like that. So you want to mix it in, okay? And it's said that this is a good offering for the Fae, which is, they're more of a like Celtic, but they're what the elves, when the Anglo-Saxons came into England and they had the elves, and then you had the fairies from the Celtic lore, and they basically mixed together in people's minds. So the Fae are essentially elves, fairies, all that sort of stuff, okay? So there, I know it's good to give them milk and honey. Traditionally, that's their sort of offering, and it's also a really good one to do outdoors if you don't want to kill the plants and stuff. Porridge and butter. So your house white or your tomta, which we're going to talk about in the next module, they particularly like porridge, especially at Christmas or Yule, with some butter on. But it's important with them that you don't give them clothes, okay? Because there's a lot of folklore where they're given some clothes and then they leave and don't return. So you need to know what's the right offering to give to a spirit, okay? And for a tomta or house white, it's usually porridge. You can give them bread. You can give them grains, like bread, especially if you made that bread yourself. That's a really good offering because you put a lot of your own energy into that. Yeah, grains in Asia, rice is a big one. Obviously here it would probably be like in the West, it would be wheat or something like that. But you could do rice as well. And that's often put on an altar. Tea. Tea is a drink. Again, this is something that happens in Asia. Fruit, another one that you see in Asia. Like we talked about before in the last module, you can have like, oranges or apples on your altar. And we know apples in particular are seen as life-giving things for the gods in the Norse culture because Idun's apples are what allow them to be sustained and live forever, or live until Ragnarok. And then you've got flowers. Now, flowers don't last particularly long, but they do make it look nice, and they do make a good offering, particularly if you've grown the flowers yourself as well. Now, if you're, say, out in nature, what can you do then? Maybe you've forgotten to bring some offerings, but you want to give something. Well, you could make an eco mandala, which is basically you gather bits and pieces like sticks and acorns and leaves and things like that. Don't take them off the tree, find them on the ground and stuff, and you put them into a nice circular shape. You make a nice pattern with them, and just make it look nice. You could, particularly if it's autumn, take some of the seeds that have just landed on the ground and plant them somewhere else. Okay, and that is helping the tree because it's helping the tree to reproduce in other places. So that's a way to honor a tree and give offerings to the tree. You could also hug a tree as well. Okay, then you're exchanging some sort of energies from yourself into that tree, and maybe the tree is giving some back to you. What you could do is get some dried herbs and some dried flowers, flower petals, and put them into a pouch and carry that with you wherever you go into nature. And then if you see a site in nature where you want to give an offering, you just get some dried herbs and flowers and put them out. Okay. Now, don't take seeds, okay, because you don't know what you're putting into the environment if you do that, particularly if they're like seeds you bought from the shop or something. But dried herbs and flowers, they're usually not going to sprout or anything like that. And so you could take those and just lay some of those down as an offering. Now, incense and scent are also a good offering. It's particularly good if you're at home, but you could also take them out as well. But remember that candles and incense, they didn't really, we don't see examples of them until Christianity comes in, okay, in German areas. So it is good to have incense and scent, and I think because it's something that attracts the spirits, but it's not necessarily fully historical, okay? Particularly in the Germanic areas. Now you've got other things like poetry, song, dance, craft, carvings. Maybe you're going to carve the god statue or something. Now you can do these things. You can maybe burn some of them in fire. You can bury some of them. You could just put it on your altar. It doesn't have to be a physical thing. It can be the intangible things, as we said, like the poetry and song and dance. You can see in the picture at the bottom right there, people are dancing around in that. That's an offering, okay? Then there's some other more, not directly in ritual, but other things you can do. Volunteering. So, I mean, it could be volunteering in a ritual, but it could be volunteering in something that's associated with those gods or spirits. So maybe if it's Thor you're honoring, you go and volunteer in some sort of protection thing, like volunteer for the police or volunteer as a security guard, or I don't know, volunteering in some way. Maybe if it's the goddess Ire, who's more associated with healing, although really all the gods are associated with healing, but she specifically is, then you could maybe go and volunteer in a hospital or an old people's home or something, doing something that you're essentially offering and sacrificing your time and your energy for that god. You could dedicate that action to that god. It could be that you give money or to charity associated with that god or spirit. So maybe if you are trying to honor the Earth Mother or Jord or Nerthas, you want to give an offering to a conservation charity. Maybe that's your thing you're promising. So you say, if you help me with having some good crops this year, then I will put, I don't know, £20 into this conservation charity for you. And then there's blood as well. So obviously blood was a historical offering. It can be an animal sacrifice. I would suggest that if you are not rearing the animal on your own farm, looking after the animal, and know exactly how to do a proper slaughter of the animal, then do not give animal blood. Do not kill an animal, okay? Because it's got to be done in certain ways, and in fact, it's probably illegal in most places unless it's done through an abattoir, and that is not a suitable offering. Blood that has come from an abattoir is not ever suitable because the animal's gone through a lot of suffering and pain. It hasn't been killed in a respectful way, and it's just no good. So some people suggest like just going to a butcher and getting some blood from there. It's not an acceptable offering, okay, in my view, because it hasn't been done right. Okay. When it comes to giving your own blood as well, sometimes people like to give their own blood. Be very careful with that, okay? Because you're giving, you're forming a very strong bond, okay? And you're essentially giving them power over you. So you need to be very careful who you're giving that to, okay? And if you're going to do it, make sure you do it safely and cleanly. So you might want to get one of these sort of these lancets that you get for diabetes, and get some alcohol wipes to make sure there's no infections or anything. And then you could do a little prick that way, and give it a little bit of blood like that. Don't go cutting your hands or anything with that, like that, with knives and stuff, because that's neither hygienic, and you could cut something you shouldn't be doing. So I would recommend not doing blood, but if you are, just make sure that you do it right, okay, and safely. Okay, so some last things to consider for this video. Don't give too much as an offering, okay? It can be tempted to try and give a lot, but actually the Heathenry, which is Odin's own words, he says, "No great thing needs a man to give. Oft little will purchase praise. With half a loaf and a half-filled cup, a friend full fast I made." Okay, so he's saying that you don't need to give a lot, just a little bit of drink and food, and that's enough to build that friendship up. Okay, because when you're giving, you're essentially also creating a debt that the other person needs to give to you, and if you're giving something massive, they may feel that they can't give you something back, and they're indebted to you. So a small thing regularly is better than some really big offering, okay? Unless it's a really big thing you want, maybe, and then you might want to do a big offering. But essentially, you don't need to be going out and wasting hundreds of pounds on offerings every month, okay? A small bit of offerings is just as good. And in fact, Odin himself says that. Next thing is being biodegradable. So if you're going to give an offering that is out in nature, be careful of what you're giving. Make sure it's biodegradable. So don't go leaving litter and candles and other rubbish out there, okay? And consider the impact on the ecosystem. So, for instance, be careful with seeds. Don't go introducing seeds in a place where those plants are not growing already, okay? Because you're going to impact and destroy the ecosystem potentially, and that will annoy the land spirits and the gods. Be careful about what food you put out. If you're putting out cooked food, then it's going to attract rats. Some people also say citrus stuff can attract rats as well. So just be careful what you're putting out, because rats will come in and then they'll start killing off a lot of the other creatures, babies and things. Okay, so be very careful what you are putting out. Research before you do it. Leave no trace. Okay, there should not be any trace after you've left that you were there. Okay, now there's this really annoying trend at the moment of people going to holy sites and burning candle wax, or going to a holy tree and setting a candle up underneath it. And then we have examples now over the last few years of candle wax going all over these sacred stones and things, or of sacred trees being burnt down because of the candle they left. Okay, so please do not have candles near trees. Do not burn candles on top of stones, sacred stones and stuff. If you're going to have a candle, you're best putting it in a little jar. Okay, but definitely take everything with you when you leave. Okay. What about disposal of offerings? So it depends what it is. You may want to, if it's food, you may want to consume some of it, okay, in the sort of shared sacred meal. But there's going to be bits that you haven't consumed. Now, do you just chuck it away? I would recommend that if you've got a compost heap, you dispose of it on a compost heap. If it's something that you can burn, if you're trying to give a sort of burnt offering, you could just let the fire consume it. If it's biodegradable, you could then use like the ashes and stuff on your land, on your garden or wherever. Really, if you can pour it down a sink if it's liquid, you can put it in the bin if it's food or some more physical thing. But I would recommend trying not to do that. Try to find other ways that are eco-friendly to dispose of it. That's sort of the main overall thing, is be eco-friendly with it. Be be careful what you're doing with it. You don't want to cause more litter and rubbish and other stuff. You don't want to anger the land spirits. So when you're disposing of things, I would say you can consume it if it's supposed to be a shared meal, but normally I would say don't consume it, okay, if it's not supposed to be part of the shared meal. Get rid of it in other ways, ideally compost it or something like that. Dispose of it in an eco-friendly way. Do not just treat it as rubbish. Other people will say, well, once the gods and spirits have taken their essence from it, so you maybe leave it on the altar for, I don't know, 24 hours usually. Once the gods and spirits have taken the essence from it, you can just get rid of it any way you like. But just, I would say yes, but try and be eco-friendly in what you're doing. Now, an offering is supposed to be a sacrifice. It's supposed to be some sort of personal cost. So there should be a personal cost to you by doing this. It should not be something that's really, really easy. But equally, as the Heathenry says, you don't need to give lots, so not too much. So you want something that's a sort of balance, okay? As we said with the animal sacrifice, if you're going to do that, don't unless it's legal and you're trained how to do it and you're going to eat the meat then and there in a community meal, okay? Don't just kill it for the sake of killing it, for the sake of doing a sacrifice. The reason they mostly did it in the past was that they were trying to get the meat to have a meal as a community, a shared sacred meal, okay? So you're using the animal up. As I said about the blood, use your lancet and your alcohol wipes. If you're going to give blood, give your own, not someone else's, i.e. not animal blood. It's not your blood to give. You're not making a sacrifice by doing that, as far as I'm concerned. And really importantly, give before you receive, okay? So don't go giving and then, or don't go asking for lots of stuff and not giving anything, okay? They're not a piggy bank in the sky. You give something before you receive. Maybe try to give to the spirits for a year and a day to start with, to build that relationship with them, and then you can start asking for things. And that's not always practical, but having a period of time when you're trying to just give gifts and build up that relationship in the first place is a good idea, okay? And they will naturally give things to you that you're not even asking for during that time. Okay, so that's where we're going to end this video today. And then we'll come back and we'll do the next video, and this one will be on divination.